Hello YouTube. Today I'm going to talk about alternative controllers to the STM32 boards that are far superior and easier to use. You may have saw my last video where I talk about dark company secrets of the STMicroelectronics and how to hack their software to be able to use the boards easier with Arduino. Now, what if you don't want to use that software hack and you want to find something that's easier to program? Well, that's what today's video here is for. I'm not going to be showing you any software installation. I'm just going to show you the controllers. There are other sources that tell you about the software installations that if I remember, I will probably link in the description below on request from comments below. Now, before we start, in case you hear any screaming children, our neighbors, all of them have screaming children, and usually that means both the children and the adults are not that bright in the brain area. So if you hear any loud hyper screaming, just ignore it and say in your head, stupid kids, stupid kids. Okay, now let's get started. So, where should I start? Okay, sorry, I'm trying to figure out a good starting point here. So STM32 boards are generally harder to program than any other board, 32-bit or not. Today I'm going to be talking about alternatives to these boards that are far easier to program and superior in quality and ease of access. I am not going to be covering performance differences or other different hardware, any hardware differences or performance differences. I'm more going to be talking about two primary things: ease of access and quality. Those are the two important things that I'm making this video for about these controllers. So, I'm going to talk about both STM32 board and STM8 boards. STM32 boards are 32-bit, and STM8 boards are 8-bit. I will start with the STM32 boards. Starting with the lowest processor architecture, ARM Cortex M0. There are four processor types that are common: Cortex M0, M3, M4, and M7. The four main ones that are using controllers like these. And I'm going to go through all of them. Although some of these processors are not ARM processors, they can be equivalent to ARM processors, equally, but better versions. We're going to start with the lowest, the SAMD21, or beginning with the Arduino 0. This is the clone board, which does not have the debug port, but it still works just as well. This board has an instant USB upload port, which can upload super fast when you're uploading the code. The Arduino 0 is probably the best starter 32-bit board you can ask for. It has one true analog output, a digital to analog converter, around down here somewhere. I don't remember what pin it is, but there is one true analog digital converter on this thing of 10-bit. It has several analog inputs that are 12-bit each, and one analog output that's 10-bit. Theoretically, you can use that analog output to generate audio sound if you know how to drive it. It's all down to the software if it properly controls the analog pin or not. This board also has an I2S driver, inter-integrated sound, which is the audio driving system that sounds almost like the I2C, but it's designed for sound. This one here has a few pins on it that came kind of defective. I can't toggle them on and off super fast for some reason. It's like the board is slightly defective, but it still works very fine. It works very well. And it has a very well-designed bootloader that allows the USB port to work properly, both in running mode and program mode. Although it creates two separate ports, it still works fine. Let's go on to the next controller. Another Cortex M0 processor that is fairly new. It's been a few years old, but it's like one of the best things that was ever created. A miracle of life. The Raspberry Pi Pico. One of the best controllers ever made. And if you don't believe me, you're a bad person. This thing is a modified Cortex M0 Plus processor. They have managed to cram a higher amount of RAM inside of this thing, even though the processor itself ain't designed to handle that much RAM. They even made the clock speed on it a lot faster, so it processes data faster than what it usually would. They basically hacked the design to make it better. Usually that's very hard to do. And it supports full external memory, which is right here. It can go up to 16 megabyte. This is the standard one having 2 megabyte. External program memory for you to store all your code and data storage. And yeah, this is a pretty good controller, I must say. It's like, yeah, it's like the bomb. Like, it's like superior to all the M0 M0 processors. And this here, the generic version I got that was created in China, had the same processor, but it has 2 extra buttons, a reset button and a user programmable button. It also has a programmable color LED, full color WS2812, and a 16 megabyte flash chip. The 8 megabyte is also an 8 megabyte too, but it's more common than the 16 megabyte. It does not have, the regular Raspberry Pi Pico has a full voltage step-up booster. However, this one here does not. But it still works very well, and that's all I care. And now let's go to other SAMD devices. Like Adafruit SAMD devices from Adafruit. These, like the Raspberry Pi Pico, have a bootloader that runs MicroPython, which means if you put it in program mode, when you plug it in your computer, you will get a USB flash drive interface to put your code onto as a drag and drop type thing. Theoretically, you can also save data files to the controllers and then take them off the controller onto your computer. But with that, with the right software, these can also be programmed in C++. Adafruit designed a really inefficient uploader for these, as they upload very slow, especially compared to the Raspberry Pi Pico. I mean, that uploads at a decent speed. They made these uploads slow for some reason. I mean, with the original one that uploads instantaneously, it's all about the software, it's not so much about the hardware. Unless they're using the software bitbang USB ports, which is a lot slower than hardware USB, like the original one uses. They're very small, but they have the same things, although not all the pins are used on these. Same processor, different form factor, not as many pins. But you have to download a separate board package for those. And yeah, this still works very well. Oh, I might have I should probably go over the memory amounts all the controllers have. Because I'm forgetting about the memory amounts. The STM32 processor has a total of 1/4 megabyte of program space, or 256 kilobytes, and 32 kilobytes of RAM. The Raspberry Pi Pico has 262 kilobytes of RAM and no built-in program flash. It is external only, which allows you to have larger amounts than you usually would if it was internal. So now we're going to move on to Cortex M3. Another thing I forgot to mention. The Cortex M0 processors are a good replacement for the STM32 F0 series boards or other similar boards that use the same processor. These are the best replacements. They will not be beaten by the STM boards. They're more superior. Now we're going to move on to the Cortex M3 STM32 boards, like the STM32 F103. A Cortex M3 processor that can have variable amounts of RAM depending on how big the processor chip is. This one has 20 kilobytes of RAM and 64 to 128 kilobytes of flash. This one here, as I said before, has a built-in converter chip on it, which is required to program these. You can't program these without the converter chip. But even then, they're very hard to find software for. Now, the only Cortex M3 processor I have is the Arduino Duo, running at 84 megahertz and has 2 bags of RAM, a 64 kilobyte and a 32 kilobyte of RAM, making a total of 96 kilobytes of RAM. And it has an entire half a megabyte of flash space, 512 kilobytes. Now I would say this is a pretty beefy chip on here. It's got 2 analog outputs that are 10-bit each and several analog inputs that are 12-bit each. It is shaped like an Arduino Mega. The SPI pin is on the ICSP header right here. I don't really like that much, but it still works. This here is a converter chip right here. This is not really a good converter chip, and the one I wanted to get, hackers deleted it and made it impossible to get, so I had to like forward my own board somehow, which I don't know how to do. It can also be programmed for the USB port. Although this one is kind of defective, its plug is not on the right and the LEDs are not properly connected to the USB port to show program indication. Although it still seems to work okay. But the board usually has a reset problem. This here is a clone, but they put the official Arduino symbol on there. But it's just a clone technically, it's not an official one. These usually have a problem with the reset circuit. Most of the time you have to click the reset button after you power it up, or it's not going to properly run the code. This also has an erase button, so you can erase your code mid-running. Although I don't know why that's a thing, is kind of like useless, I guess, unless you like unless there's like some thing for a special software you have to do it because I want to do it before, or I don't know, it's kind of weird. Next part, we're going to move to controllers that are technically equivalent to Cortex M0 processors, better than the STM32 F4 series processors, and other ones that have the same chip inside of them. A good equivalent to M4 processors is the ESP8266 processors. These support built-in Wi-Fi, and go up to 16 megabytes of external flash, and have 80 kilobytes of RAM. Half of it is available for use of user programming, so you really only get 40 kilobytes, maybe the full 80 in some circumstances. Although there is currently a software glitch in the ESP8266 drivers, where if you use a large data pointer, every time you use it, it crashes the code. As soon as you read the first byte, your code won't work anymore. So these are not really a good option until the software gets fixed. And since I'm the only one to discover this problem, I'll make a YouTube video on it later. But since I'm the only one to discover it, no one really cares enough to fix it. Even talking to them on their official GitHub page, they don't really care. So these may be buggy forever. Just don't use data pointers on these. The little asterisk symbol to make the data pointers, do not use those on these. The software does not support it correctly. It's buggy. This processor runs at 160 megahertz and can be underclocked to 80 megahertz. These are, like I said before, they are about the good equivalent to Cortex M4 processors. And they run faster too, at a higher clock speed. And here is the younger brother of the ESP8266, the ESP8285. It takes away a couple of the pins, but it's still pretty much the same software can drive these. This one was kind of hard to find because of the greedy sellers on AliExpress, but eventually I got my hands on one. Although some of these may come with weaker Wi-Fi signals from small defects, they're still pretty good. The ESP8266 boards also come in this cute little tiny package right here, the ESP01. They also got the ESP01S that has more flash memory. The standard ones, ESP8266, has 4 megabytes of flash. The program allows you to use 1 megabyte of flash. It can go up to 16 megabytes. However, the ESP8285 can only handle 1 megabyte of flash and up to 2 megabytes. This here has a 1 megabyte flash on it. The original version was blue and had a half megabyte flash, or 512 kilobytes. They eventually made one like this at the same component layer as the blue version, with the same amount of memory. To be able to program these, you need a little adapter like this. Although still the same processor, still the same software, it's a different selection to get the right stuff. So yeah. Now I'm going to move on to the next category. Cortex M5 and M6. Although I believe there is no such thing as Cortex M5 or M6 processors, if they were real, the next category of controllers would be equivalent to these but more superior. I'm talking about ESP32 chips. This year's original one that came out, the ESP Room 32. It has an extensive LX6 processor, boasting a little over 300 kilobytes of RAM, and external only flash up to 16 megabytes. This one has a 4 megabyte flash, allowing you to have 1 megabyte of code. I also have another one here that's a little different and has an 8 megabyte RAM chip in it too, to increase the RAM capacity. This is the ESP32 Rover. Although these are kind of oxidizing, so to get discoloration on them, and the USB plugs are turning green, and so they got some copper content that's starting to oxidize on these. They still work, but I don't know how. I might have to clean them off to get the USB cable to work properly, because they're oxidizing. This has 8 megabytes of flash. The partition system the ESP32 program has only allows you to use 3 megabytes of program space, regardless if you have an 8 megabyte or 16 megabyte flash. If you have a 16 megabyte flash, you may have to manually create a partition file to be able to support more memory. And you only get 3 megabytes. And the rest of it goes to data store, which I do not agree with. But this has 8 megabytes, so it's okay. There were more stronger ESP32 boards that are out here too. Like this. This is an ESP32 S3 board with a display built onto it and some other components. This here is a LilyGo T-Display S3. It's got a 1.9-inch display with 170 by 320 resolution, and it's parallel port driven. It has 16 megabyte of flash, although you only get a 3 megabyte partition scheme unless you design your own partition. It's got a reset button, a program mode button, and a user programmable button. So most of the pins go to the display, but you still get some that are out to be used. One problem with this, they hooked the backlight in the display up to 5 volts through a transistor that controls it differently. You can PWM the LED and turn off the LED entirely independently from the control using a certain power transistor that's built onto the board. But they hooked the backlight to 5 volt, so you want to PWM it to a duty cycle between 100 and 120, or it'll start to get very hot down here. It'll also get hot down here too. It has a battery connector for the lithium battery if you wanted to use one, and it also has an I2C adapter for a certain device that someone probably makes. This has an extensor LX7 processor. This is an S3 having 512 kilobytes of flash. RAM. 512 kilobytes of RAM, half a megabyte to be exact, and can go up to 16 megabyte of flash space. There is actually a little problem that these older boards here used to have, where the highest, if you want to make a display buffer, the highest you can go is 240 by 240. Even though there's plenty of RAM for a 240 by 320, it's some weird hardware and software quirk that is unique to these. And in some cases, from software glitches and different amounts of RAM usage, you are only limited to 240 by 230 display resolution. With the S3 board here, you can go as high as 240 by 320 with no problem. Absolutely no problem. You can also go the 240 by 320 on the Raspberry Pi Pico using half the RAM with no problem too. But there is another controller, the ESP32C3. There is also the S2, but I do not have that. It does not have a parallel display driver like the S3 does, but it has one processor, but the same LX7, and it has a little less RAM, but it still should be able to go at the same buffer size. This here is an ESP32C301, designed to look just like the 8266 versions, but it has a stronger processor, higher flash memory, and an external antenna port. This processor is basically I think you have seen my video talking about this. It's basically the older brother of the ESP8266, and we program using the same adapter. It has 4 megabytes of flash and like 300 or something kilobytes of RAM. Can go up to 16 megabytes of flash if you so desire. It has the max speed of 160 megahertz. I forgot to say, the other ESP boards have a max speed of 240 megahertz. This year, I would say, is more equivalent to a Cortex M5, and these are more equivalent to a Cortex M6. If those chips existed. I do not think they go higher than 4 and no lower than 7. Oh, there is one more processor I forgot to mention in the Cortex M0 section. Here is the TNT-LC by PJRC. It has an external bootloader chip right here to control the bootloader, and also a little driver to make one of these pins act as a full 5 volt output. Although I think it's an output only, not an input readable. This has a very weird chip name on it, but the TGLC has a 48 megahertz like the standard Cortex M0 processors, but it's not really a high memory control like the SAMD boards are. It's a 62 kilobyte of flash and only 8 kilobytes of RAM, same amount as the Arduino Mega, but less flash than the Arduino Mega has. But it's a 32-bit processor and it's pretty good. USB programmable with a very good bootloader on it. Now, unfortunately, there's a drawback of the TNT platform and Arduino. You need to download this package that gives you an extra application that is for uploading the code. All it does is upload the code and reboot the controller if you put it in programmable by accident. It's more basic than the STM32 programmer, but it does not have any viruses, so it's safer to use. It can also upload your code with no port selected. It automatically detects the port your board uses. Although you have to select the port if you want to read serial data from these. So yeah. Let's see what else I haven't covered yet. Okay, moving on to ARM Cortex M0. A very powerful processor that gets kind of hot because it's so powerful and temperature hot, but it's a pretty good thing. Ladies and gentlemen, I present you the TG4. The TG4 series processors are the current and most strongest Arduino compatible controller on this planet that exists today. And it might be a very long time before you see anything better. This is the best we got so far, but it's still a very good controller. If we take, for example, the STM32 F7 and H7, they both have Cortex M7 processors. They have a maximum speed of 480 megahertz of processor speed. Have a megabyte of RAM, and half of it is used at your disposal. The other half is like internal stuff. So you have a total of 500 kilobytes of RAM to do whatever you want with. And that means you can make a display buffer as big as 320 by 480. I've got a display right here that is like that, a 4-inch display. It's a 320 by 480 resolution. Now the STM32 H7 and other Cortex M0 boards are not really that good compared to memory usage. Like the most standard STM32 H750 only has 128 kilobytes of program space. You have another one that is 7B5, I think, and it has 2 megabytes of program space built into it. Although it's harder to program than the other ones are. There are even some that supposedly have the secondary processor of Cortex M4, like the one some of the new Arduino board uses. Although I still wouldn't recommend buying them because they use STM chips and they're hard to program. But this board here is a walk in a park compared to any STM board with the same power. It's even more powerful than the STM32 boards are. We're at 600 megahertz and can be overclocked up to 1.08 gigahertz, which is a lot faster. But if you go above 816 megahertz, you're going to need to put a heat sink on this and a heavy-duty cooling system. Because these get hot even regular. They get pretty hot when they're running. That's how powerful they are. They even have little components on the bottom like Windows processors usually have, because that's how powerful they are. Like on desktop computers. They got the little capacitors and resistors down there. Oops, dropped it. Sorry, I dropped it. And this thing is like the best control that exists as of now. Nothing else can beat this. It's more powerful than the most powerful STM32 board. And it has full external memory capability, up to 16 megabyte. Also, the TG 4.1 that here only uses 2 megabyte, and the TG... Wait, I got it backwards. TG 4.0, this one right here, uses only 2 megabytes of flash. The TG 4.1, which I do not currently have, has 8 megabytes of flash. There is a complex memory mapping engine. It's not partition based like the ESP board, but you still can't use all the memory for whatever you want, which I don't like that much. But it's still a very good processor, and it's like so powerful. It even overdrives the SPI bus, so it goes like hyper speed. No other controller can do that. I don't even know if the STM boards can do that, but I don't think they can. Now, I can't go to the TC3 boards. And because of the global chip shortage, we cannot get those, and I'm having trouble getting them in. I personally think the chip shortage was created by you know who, we can't mention their name because they run all the social media because they're evil supervillains that want to destroy the country and whatnot. So I can't say who they are because might get in trouble. But yeah, the chip shortage is man-made, so just so you know, it was created by greedy money grabbers. I'm gonna go into there on one day and I'm going to undo the chip shortages, but it's gonna take a few years before I can do that. At least 10 or more. But anyway, I can't get any of the TC3 series controllers, and I can no longer get the TC-LC boards. The TC2 board over here above, as I'm going to next, is discontinued before the chip shortage. Even then, I can't get any TC2 boards anymore unless I buy them clones on AliExpress. But they're still pretty good boards. And now, let's move on to the STM8 alternatives. These boards are not as powerful and can't have as much memory as the 32-bit boards. They're 8-bit and they're actually a little awkward to program. STM8s have a different debug interface than STM32s do, and it makes them even more harder to program without special equipment. They could probably use the converter chip, but I don't think they're as good as the STM32 boards are with the converter chips. I currently do not own one, and I have no plans to do so, because they're not that good, but I am going to show you alternatives to them anyway. We're going to start with the most classics of the Arduino boards. The most classic ones. The Arduino Uno. A very good 8-bit AVR style processor. 32 kilobytes of flash and 2 kilobytes of RAM. The classic version that was used, and it has a lot of variety of purposes, has 6 analog inputs, 8 if you have a Nano. The Arduino Uno has 6 analog inputs, 10-bit each. But it can go up to 8 if you use an Arduino Nano. The first 6 analog inputs can be used as digital outputs, and probably digital inputs too. But on the Arduino Nano, the extra analog pins cannot. They're analog inputs only. This has a converter chip on it to program it, and a bootloader to allow the serial programmer to work. Usually, you will program these boards through the SPI interface, which is how you have to do if you want to write a new bootloader to it. AVR boards and also a PIC microcontroller, which are a different story, have the same programming method for the SPI interface. We usually require a special programmer, but supposedly you can use another Arduino board to make that programmer work. It's pretty cool what people can do. And next, we have the Arduino Nano. The exact same processor used on the Uno, with a converter chip on it and stuff. It has a different bootloader though. This one has the old bootloader, but it still works very well. Same amount of pins, same everything. The voltage regulator for the 3-volt side is inside the converter chip, and it's not really that powerful, but it still works. Although you can't really upload to it while you're draining the converter on this. It's not a good converter on, not really that. It has a voltage regulator for external power, but the internal 3-volt regulator is a little weak. Now, I plan to make a special video for this one right here. This is the Arduino Nano 168. It's just like this, the Arduino Nano and Uno, original version, except it has half of the program space in RAM. 16 kilobytes of flash and 1 kilobyte of RAM. I mean, you can't fit as much code on here as you would usually. Everything else is the same. Although, the voltage regulator on this converter computer is a little faulty, and it uploads at half the speed. I don't know if it's like deliberate to upload at half the speed, but the converter chip on here is faulty. The voltage regulator inside is, if I use it on even a light load, it like cuts off the connection to the computer until I unplug my load. So it's got a faulty regulator on it. I plan to replace it one day. And now we're gonna move on to the Arduino Leonardo. It's a fully USB powered chip, 8-bit AVR with a fully functional bootloader that actually works. It has 32 kilobytes of flash and 2.5 kilobytes of RAM. Slightly more RAM than the Uno board, but the same amount of flash. It does not run as fast, but it's still a pretty good controller. Although it has more pins, not all of them are used on here. The converter chip used on here, there is actually 3 different types. The ATmega 8, ATmega 16, and ATmega 32. Which determines how much memory it has based off that number. This is the ATmega 32. I have not seen anything use an ATmega 8. I don't know if it ever will be. I don't know yet. But the have some boards use the ATmega 16 as the converter chip. Like in this one right here, the Arduino Duo. That's an 18 like a 16 right there. It's not as efficient as a CH340 or other converted chips, but it still works. I even have a generic Arduino Mega that is the same chip by a certain company on Amazon called Elegoo. The one problem with this one though, they deliberately programmed the converted chips where you have to wait 10 seconds before the board boots. That's why I bought another one that has a more superior converted chip, a CH340. But the next topic is the Arduino Mega. It has 8 kilobytes of RAM, 8 kilobytes of RAM, and an entire quarter megabyte of flash. 256 kilobytes, just like the Arduino Zero boards. This board runs slightly slower than the Uno, but it runs faster than the Leonardo. If I read the datasheet correctly, this processor can go up to 16 megahertz clock speed, but it processes at 15 megahertz. Which is a little weird, I must say, but it still works very well. They even have a little tiny version like this, called the Arduino Mega Pro. Sometimes they may come with counterfeit chips or not so good chips, but this is a pretty good one here. It's got the converter right here, the 3-volt regulator, and an external 5-volt regulator. And a lot of pins you can use in a little compact fashion. Although for some reason the Arduino Mega chips may have a chance to get slightly warm. This one here gets the warmest, and this one here gets the second warmest. I don't really know why. Sometimes it gets a little warm. It's a little weird, I guess. It's a little fuzzy rock on the stool. What other boards do I have to talk about over here? I think I have to talk about all the boards and alternatives here. I plan to make a dedicated video for the Arduino Nano 168 because I don't think many people know about this board. Or many people have known about it, but they don't really use it. And I have a special alternative that board is for, and I'll talk about in another video. So I'm going to just make sure I have talked about everything here. Okay, I have talked about all the alternatives that I have discovered so far. Nothing else can beat these, and they're all better than STM32 or STM8 in some way. Nothing else can be better than these boards. Except for those two right there. Those are STM boards right there, and they're not that good. If I had to pick between the STM32 F103 and the Arduino Do, I would pick the Arduino Do. It's easier to program, far superior in hardware and software, and works just a lot better. And it's got more pins too. Even though the F103 has a larger size, the F103 GET6, which has about half a megabyte of flash and like 100 whatever's of RAM or whatever, but a lot of pins. Still not as good as Arduino Do is though. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have found an expanded library of controllers that are better than STM boards. And I hope you can get better use out of these than the STM boards, at least so far. Hope you enjoyed this video. Oh wait, one more I forgot to talk about. The TC 2.0. Same processor as the Arduino Leonardo. But it's a smaller size, but all the pins are used on it instead of just some of them. It does not have a 3-volt regulator, but it has a part where I can put my own on here if I wanted to. The bootloader allows this to run slightly faster than on the Arduino Leonardo. It's something to do with the bootloader that's on it. Can increase performance somehow. It's a little interesting. So, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed my alternative video, and I hope you can get better use out of these in the STM boards. I will see you next time, and have some fun with your new controller boards. Goodbye.